Good morning and welcome to a daily dose of good news on Friday, July the 3rd. I'm glad that you can be with us. This is actually take 5 of today's daily good news. Has been outside and the neighbors have seemed to be choosing to get their yards cleaned up for the holiday on Friday morning. And so we're back down in the Watchman basement and glad to be with you. Good news for this morning comes from the book of Genesis, the 27th chapter. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called his elder son Esau and said to him, "My son?" And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "See, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out in the field and hunt game for me. Then prepare for me savory food such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me game and prepare for me savory food to eat, that I may bless you before the Lord before I die.' Now therefore, my son, obey my word as I command you. Go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids, so that I may prepare from them savory food for your father, such as he likes. And you shall take it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies." But Jacob said to his mother Rebekah, "Look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man of smooth skin. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him, and bring a curse on myself and not a blessing." His mother said to him, "Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my word and go. Get them for me." So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared savory food, such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. And she put the skins of the kids on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. Then she handed the savory food and the bread that she had prepared to her son Jacob. So he went to his father and said, "My father?" And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, so that you may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you found it so quickly, my son?" He answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." So Jacob went up to his father Isaac, who felt him, and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. He said, "Are you really Esau?" He answered, "I am." Then he said, "Bring it to me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." So he brought it to him, and he ate. And he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." Here ends the reading. What a story, filled with scoundrels. This Old Testament epic, continuing the saga of God's promised blessing, progressing from one generation to the next. A promise that began with Abraham and Sarah. A promise that God kept through them, despite having been pagan worshipers before that time and having been barren almost 100 years when God made the promise that they would indeed have a family that would bless all nations. And God kept that promise to Abraham and Sarah, despite their own best efforts at hedging their bets on God's faithfulness. When still they were trying to conceive after God's initial promise and unable to do so, decided that maybe to give God a hand a little bit, that Abraham should go to his concubine Hagar and have a son with her so that the blessing might be passed from one generation to another. But God had made God's blessing with Abraham and Sarah. And God kept God's promise of blessing through Abraham and Sarah, finally with the birth of Isaac, their son, with Ishmael, his half-brother, through Hagar, being sent packing. Then today, we have the story of God's blessing passing to the next generation beyond Isaac and Rebekah. And it's a story filled with scoundrels. Isaac, now old and blind, sends out his oldest and favorite son to hunt for game that he might eat of a savory feast when God's blessings would pass from one generation to the next. Yet when Rebekah heard about the plan, she devised a counteroffensive of her own, if you will. Such a God's blessing would pass not from Isaac to Esau, but from Isaac to Jacob, her favorite son. Scoundrel that she is. And while Esau was away hunting game, Rebekah then would prepare a feast for Jacob from the finest lambs that were already there in the flock at the house. And Jacob then would share that feast with Isaac instead of Esau. Jacob wearing Esau's clothes so that he might smell of Esau. Jacob with wool from the kid lambs on his hands and on the nape of his neck so that he might feel like Esau. And with that plan devised, Jacob the scoundrel jumped at the opportunity. The opportunity to dupe his dad out of Esau's blessing, the way he'd already duped his famished older brother out of his birthright some days before, when the scoundrel Esau impulsively and irresponsibly exchanged his birthright for a simple plate of food that Jacob had prepared. So Jacob carries this savory feast into his old and blind father, claims to be Esau, at which point Isaac, the scoundrel, chooses to believe he is indeed Esau, ignoring the fact that he sounds like Jacob, settling for the smell of his clothes and the hair on his hands and neck. And indeed, God's blessing passed from Isaac to Jacob. Even among the scoundrels God had to work with in this instance. But perhaps we shouldn't be surprised, because God's promise of blessing is God's work, and God's work alone. Always. It's the way it would be all the way through the next generation with Joseph. And later we get to Jesse and David. Right up to Joseph, who's the father of Jesus. Earthly father, anyway. And this Jesus would be the one through whom God keeps the promise of blessing for all people always, through his suffering, death, resurrection, and ascension. With God's promise of blessing for generation after generation, now progressing through Jesus himself evermore. For if you'll remember, at a feast of his own on the night before he died, Jesus had invited his own betraying and denying and tax collecting and self-minded scoundrel friends to receive God's promise of blessing through him. And his real presence in, with, and under the bread and wine, every time they would eat of that bread and wine again in remembrance of him. That's promise of blessing. That is God's work and God's work alone. Scoundrels like us merely being the beneficiaries. And boy, are we ready for God to keep the promise of blessing among us this Sunday. When I preside again, finally, as Christ at the table, wearing a white baptismal robe to veil my own scoundrel self beneath. And when scoundrels like you will receive the real presence of Christ in the bread and wine, eating and drinking by faith, both at church and at home. For those of you who will let me know that you would like us to bring it to you for that purpose. The promise of blessing which relies nothing on me and nothing on you, but solely on God, from the promise made at the very beginning, and which has been kept throughout the eons, for the sake of blessing scoundrels through scoundrels like us. Amen. Pray for you a happy and safe holiday weekend, 4th of July, as we celebrate our independence and freedom, particularly the opportunity we have to freely express our religious convictions and faith as a church. Continue to pray, too, for Gail Svensson at OSU Hospital. I invite your prayers as well for Chris Eicher and his family at the passing of his mom this week and the funeral that we'll be conducting for her this afternoon. And again, look forward to worshiping with you, whether at home in your basement or living room or wherever you might be watching, or if you choose to come to church. It will all be broadcast from that place with the new audiovisual capability we have for doing so. We'll look forward to being gathered around the Word and the sacrament once again, scoundrels that we are, beneficiaries of God's grace in that way. You'll be able to tap into that service the same way as you always have, www.engagedbygrace.org/livestream. Same website /bulletin to receive a bulletin as well. And again, please do let us know if we might be sharing with you sacrament from these services as well. And remember, too, that there's an opportunity for the service again this coming Wednesday morning starting at 11:45. That's it for today. Take care. Have a good day. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.